Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for FEI Dallas's webinar entitled 10 Top Mistakes Employers Make in the Recruiting and Hiring Process. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes regarding the CPE credits that are available today. We are offering 1.5 credits today. To be eligible for these credits, you have a few criteria that must be met. Answer 5 of the 6 polling questions during the webinar and have a total viewing time of at least 75 minutes. Participants will receive a CPE notification email when the credits are available, and that typically takes between 7 to 10 business days. We are unable to grant CPE credits in cases where technical difficulty preclude eligibility. CPE program sponsored guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to have satisfied the minimum requirements as stated. However, if you do have polling question issues and can't see or enter a polling question, please put your answer in the Q&A box. We will make sure you get your credit. In accordance with the standards for the National Registry of CPE Sponsors, CPE will be granted based on a 50-minute hour. And now I'd like to introduce Bob Walker, who's Vice President and Financial Advisor for Merrill Lynch, as well as FEI Dallas's Chapter Career Management Chair. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you all for joining us on our virtual Tuesday meeting. I think you'll find the speaker to be enlightening and things will go very well. I'd like to thank the advisory committee for the FENG, which is Cliff Edwards, Jim Ashworth, Kelly Harris, and John Casey. I want to thank you all for your assistance in helping to put all this on, particularly Cliff, who does a lot of the speakers, does a lot of the work in that regard. Our chapter sponsors are the FEI, and typically when we meet virtually, of course, we also meet in premise, and I'd like to thank them for their assistance as well. Without further ado, I'd like to simply introduce to you Mr. Cliff Edwards, who will introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Cliff Edwards with Thomas Edwards Group. I think I know a lot of you out there. I can't really see you, and I was going to ask for a show of hands on how many of you know Rich, but again, I won't be able to see you. And kind of missed the face-to-face ones, but apparently we're getting some pretty good crowds on these Zoom meetings. Before I introduce Rich, I would just say for those in transition, it's an interesting job market. We saw our business fall about 30 or 40% in a couple of weeks. But then after about a month, it's come back pretty strong, and there's a lot going on, you know, and that's pretty amazing with the lockdowns and with layoffs and all the things going on out in the job market. So we've been pleasantly surprised. So don't feel like you need to start looking after the summer. I would, you know, if you're already out there, I would definitely do my networking and get my resume out there. And if any of you want to update on the job market, what we're seeing, or just any kind of advice or a sounding board on your job searches, just pop me an email, and what I'll do is I'll put several together for a Zoom call, and maybe we can do that regularly. It's cliff@thomasedwards.com. Well, today we have Rich Lavinski speaking, and he has spoken before FEI a number of times. He's done panels, he's spoken with his partner, Tony Bashara. Today, he is going to talk about a topic that I think is really going to help us a lot. He's going to talk about the top 10 common hiring mistakes, and a lot of this is lifted from his book that he wrote a couple of years ago. And, you know, it gives an inside look at what companies are doing wrong in their hiring. And then he's also going to give some tips on how you might be able to spot those things and then overcome them when you see those. And I think it can give a great advantage. And I'll tell you, those, I went through the book a couple of years ago, and they are spot on. It's really interesting what we see being behind the scenes of what goes on with these companies. Rich, as many of you know, is the founder of East 57th Street Partners. They provide business advisory services in accounting, finance, IT, and HR. Now, Rich, if you've known him, He's founded a number of companies, and all of them have been very successful. Years ago, he founded Lavinski Allen and Associates, was able to sell that to one of the big national players, and was very successful in building kind of a real trailblazer in accounting and finance project services. He was doing this kind of work before it was widely accepted in the market. And I remember when I started my company, I always looked up to him as a guy that really broke all the doors down for the rest of us. He started his career in tax with Arthur Anderson. He has an undergrad in economics from the University of Chicago and an MBA in accounting and taxation from the University of North Texas. I think, please use the chat box to ask any questions, and we'll have plenty of time. We'll have some time during the meeting, but then also at the end for questions. But without further ado, Rich Lavinski.
Before I interrupt you, I'd like to press a poll question to our audience before we get started with Rich. And here is your first poll. It's a pretty easy one. Are you currently in transition? This helps Rich give his presentation a little bit more spin for the folks on the call. So I'll give you just a few more seconds to answer that poll. Okay, and I'll give Rich those results.
Great. All right, 56% of you say you're in transition, 36% say no, and 9% are concerned about your job. So that's good information. I'll keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. And first, let me thank Nancy, Bob, and Cliff, and FEI and FENG for giving me the opportunity to speak before you. Regarding Cliff's kind introduction, Cliff and I have known each other for many years, and he always gives me way more credit than I deserve. And so I'm convinced that Cliff thinks I have some pictures of him in very compromising situations. Maybe I do, I'm not ready to admit it one way or another. As long as he keeps saying nice things about me, I'm just gonna pretend like I do.
Yeah, so, join the club anyway, so.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so any event, Cliff's a dear friend, so is Bob. I've just gotten to know Nancy, and thank you for allowing me to make this presentation. And so, Nancy, if you go to the next slide. This slide talks about our companies, Babbage and Associates and East 57th Street Partners, helping organizations hire since 1952. Just in all transparency, I was not alive in 1952, although it looks like I've been alive since 1932. Actually, neither was Tony alive during 1952, but his Aunt Mildred started Babbage and Associates in 1952 in Fort Worth, Texas, as one of the first woman-owned businesses in that city and one of the first employment agencies in the Southwest. And so East 57th Street mainly does project staffing, project consulting. We do some executive search, but Babbage, on the other hand, exclusively does executive search. And so Tony and I have been friends and business partners for the last handful of years. Tony tells everybody we co-wrote the book, 100,000 Successful Hires. I think he's exaggerating a bit. My contributions to that book were pretty slim, but I'll take all the credit for anything you like about the book and blame everything you don't like on Tony. So any event, if anybody is interested after the presentation, if somebody emails me or Nancy, we've got about 20 here that I can have sent off if you're interested in them. So, so just let me know. So with that, let's go to our next slide.
Before we do that, Rich, let's do a second polling question for our audience. I've pushed that out to you now. That second question is, will your company be hiring in the next 6 months? This might be out of your realm of knowledge, and in that case, possibly would be the answer for you, but I'll wait a few more seconds while you guys get a chance to answer that poll. and then I'll share those results. And there you go, Rich, some results on that question. 20% are saying yes, 45% are saying no, and 35% don't have an idea.
All right. Good information. Thank you, Nancy. So let's start with, there's 10 reasons. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the first few slides than the last few slides, but one of the top mistakes that employees make in recruiting and hiring process is that they don't have a clear idea of, or a clear understanding of what the job should be. And in all the years that I've been doing this, I got started in the late 80s. I've often gone to the hiring manager, the person who tells us that they need help finding a particular person for a job. And my common question is, anybody would naturally ask, well, what does good look like to you? What's a good candidate for this position look like to you? And more often than not, it's as if I ask them, please describe to me the taste of milk. And if you think about it, I'm guessing most people on this call would struggle defining the taste of milk. We kind of, we see it, and when it hits our taste buds, we know it's milk. But try to articulate that to somebody who's never tasted milk, and I promise you, you'll have trouble with it. And so what we end up doing as hiring managers is sort of taking the easy way out. We often start off with writing, 2 to 3 page job descriptions with dozens of bullet points, listing, our dream set of experiences and skills that we want the potential candidate that we think we should hire to have. Sometimes we even get more lazy than that and just say, oh, I need to hire a VP of finance. So I'll go out on the internet and find something posted on one of the job boards and say, oh, here's a good job description. I'll just cut and paste that. And often what you end up with is a bunch of listings of requirements that really don't apply to the particular job that needs to be done. As a matter of fact, I personally feel in the years that I've been in this business that as much as a third to a half of the skills that are listed on the job description form most often will never be used or simply not that important for getting the job done. I'm pretty far along in my career, and I got my MBA 30 years ago, and I can't remember a darn thing about what I learned having an MBA, but I still am unsurprised to see that hiring managers will post a job, let's say, for a CFO, and they want somebody with a minimum of 10 to 15 years of experience. So they'll list all these requirements. And then what you find is they'll say, well, they must have an MBA. That's a must have. Or I saw one the other day. It was actually sent to me by a client that said must be an expert in Excel and PowerPoint. And the client is looking for a CFO for a $100 million division of a publicly traded company. And I'm thinking, well, honestly, if I were CFO of a $100 million division, I'm not sure I'm doing my own PowerPoints. I'm betting somebody else will do a better job at that than I would, but it's a requirement on that job description. The same way with Excel. I'm not saying a CFO shouldn't be good at Excel, but really, would you turn somebody down because Excel, being an expert in Excel and being able to do some sort of crazy pivot table or something would exclude you from being a good treasurer, a good merger and acquisition person, a good person to find, renegotiate your lines of credit and so forth? I don't think so. And so the one problem that hiring managers have, or the mistake they make, is they don't really have a clear idea of what the job looks like or should be. And because of that, they have trouble communicating that to you as potential candidates. And so in my mind, the job descriptions have to be pretty measurable and tangible. You know, often they'll say, well, you have to have excellent communication skills or be a team player. Well, you know, if you're applying for a job, who's going to say, well, I'm good at my job, I just don't like teams, or I'm a crappy communicator? Nobody's going to exclude themselves from the fact that, you know, you have must have be a good communicator or team member. The more tangible things would be, well, if I'm looking for a VP of finance that has SEC reporting, would be, well, have you filed, you know, how much experience have you had filing SEC reports? I need somebody who's done it for the last 5 years. Yes or no, did you do that? I need an accounting manager who's managed at least 10 people. Yes or no, have you ever managed up to 10 people? Those are specific and measurable. And so what you as a candidate have to do is figure out, well, how do I work around that? Because unfortunately, the other thing hiring managers think is that every applicant that I consider hiring is going to come to spec in alignment with the job description. And what I've tried to explain to not only our hiring managers, but the clients is that people don't come to spec. Those of you who are watching this Zoom conference, with the right engineer, you could get together with an engineer and within a millimeter, manufacture the chair you're sitting on or the desk you're working from, because you know you can make a desk or a chair or a car to spec, but people don't come that way. On a good day, if a job description has 10 attributes, if the hiring manager can find somebody with 7 out of 10 of those attributes, that's a good day. So your job is to try, as a candidate, is to figure out, well, how close can I come to 7 out of 10, to a point that Cliff was making a little bit earlier about the job market. If you wait to look for a job description where you fit 10 out of the 10 requirements, you're going to be waiting for a long time. So just take a look at the most important things and then apply according to those things that line up best. So there's always obstacles of that. So often the job description will say, well, I must have 5 or more years in this industry. Let's just say it's the telecom industry, and you've never done anything in the telecom industry. But as you look at the job description, there's other things. Well, we need somebody who knows mergers and acquisitions. We need somebody who, knowledge of assimilating systems and business processes, expertise in policies, procedures, and controls. Well, if you've done those in other industries, then what you need to do is focus, well, how can I, in my application or my resume, tune into those things, and then hopefully get the hiring manager to focus on those functional areas and less on the industry. I've said this before in some of the FEI meetings, is back in the early, early mid-90s or mid-90s to early 2000s, telecom in the Dallas-Fort Worth area was exploding. And we'd get calls all the time for finding people, accounting and finance people, for example, with telecom experience. Well, you couldn't find any because it was a relatively new industry for the area. And if you did find somebody, it was a game of playing, musical chairs. So we started pressing our clients, said, well, look, what is it that's important about the telecom industry? And one client would say, well, it's revenue recognition. And we would make the point, well, let's think about this. There's a boatload of people with oil and gas industry experience out there. Tell me the difference between recognizing revenue on something that goes through a pipeline as opposed to something that goes through a fiber optic or satellite dish. And they would come back and say, well, you're right, there isn't much difference. So we would send them oil and gas people. And then so one thing to think about are things that, as accounting and finance people, are things that maybe cross over. The other thing to think about is often hiring managers in that big list of what good looks like they'll include things like, oh, they need to be a great leader, manager, communicator, have a great work ethic and character. And so when I ask a hiring manager, well, listen, tell me how long you think it takes somebody to acquire good leadership skills, good management skills, be of good character. Most hiring managers say, well, that's a matter of years, if not a lifetime. Okay, I would agree with that. So now tell me, how long will it take somebody of above average intelligence to learn the nuances in accounting and finance in your industry? And the most common answer is 3 to 5 months. I've had a couple say as long as 6 months. Oil and gas and healthcare will say, well, it takes forever. They've gotten a little bit better about that. But the point is to be able to share with the hiring manager and say, look, you've got a 3 to 6 month investment in somebody learning your industry and the nuances of your company, which they're probably going to have to learn anyway, even if they came from your industry, or years investing in somebody to teach them how to be a good leader, manager, communicator, have good character and work ethic. Which would you rather invest in, 3 to 6 months, or teaching somebody how to have good character? So I think those are things that you should keep in mind as you apply. And the other thing is that if you have a chance, which these days nobody does. In the old days, we would ask, well, can I talk to who had the job before so I can understand what was important to them in their routine? Can I talk to who is going to be supervising, who I have this deliverable to, so I know what's important to them? But most important is always ask, well, what problem are we trying to solve? If you're hiring me or hiring somebody else, typically you're hiring to get somebody in the door to solve a problem. And if I understand that problem, then I can line up my track record and experiences to help you solve that problem. So I would say there's, lots of things that we should ask about as a hiring manager. I think the best thing is to start with asking whoever this person's going to work closest with, the person who has the most skin in the game. Tell me again, what problem are we trying to solve? And then as a candidate, let's look at our experiences and track record and say, yeah, I've done that before. It might have been in a different context. You're real estate. I came out of oil and gas, but I've done tons of mergers and acquisitions. I can learn the oil and gas industry fast enough. Nancy, next slide, please. Having an unrealistic idea of what kind of candidate might be available or the money it might take to hire them. The point I want to make here to the hiring managers in the audience is, so often as hiring managers, either we or our bosses tell us, well, go out and hire the best person for this job. And the problem with that is you have to put that in context. Because let's just say you're a $10 million company and you're hoping to do some mergers and acquisitions and you're self-funded. And you say, I'm the person who's best at this. Well, you're a $10 million company. The best person at that may cost $400,000 a year in base salary. Can you really, or do you really need the best? And as a $10 million self-funded company, can you even attract the best? In the same way with, other expertise, maybe it's a NetSuite expert, maybe it's somebody who's done a certain type of financial reporting. So companies need to be realistic about, what is out there in the marketplace and what they can find. I don't place salespeople, but my partner, business partner, Tony does. There's a handful of salespeople in our industry that are iconic, and he has small companies who would love to hire them, but they just don't have the budget or the size and shape, and they're unrealistic. Say, well, find me somebody just like her. Well, there is nobody just like her. And by the way, if you wanted to hire her, it's like 3 times what you are budgeted for. You'd be putting yourself out of business by the time that person can ramp up enough to, cover the cost of themselves. So, I think people need to be realistic about what they're looking for. And then you as a candidate, one good thing is, the more people that the hiring manager talks to, sooner or later, they'll get a taste and flavor for what that market is. So I would ask you to be patient, because sometimes you may be the first person in and the client says, no, this person really isn't a fit. I'm wanting much more experience or technical skills for the money. And a month later, they're finding out that's just not an option for them. And they're calling you back. So don't get frustrated. Just remember, keep in touch, keep the door open, and keep reminding people that you're out there and available for the work. Next slide, Nancy. Too many people and the wrong people involved in the interviewing process. The biggest problem with hiring mistakes, if I'm a hiring manager and I make a hiring mistake, those mistakes are hard to hide and they're very, very expensive to erase. So what happens as a consequence of that is people like to spread the risk in case something goes wrong. So if I hire you and it goes wrong, well then, oh man, Rich is an idiot. He just made the worst hiring decision known to man. But if Rich goes out and says, well, I'm going to make a decision about this person, but I'm going to ask 8 other people in the company to interview him or her, now that blows up, everybody owns the mistake, and nobody's just pointing at me. And so my ego gets soothed because I'm not entirely to blame for the wrong hiring judgment. So I'm reminded of something that my mother often said. She said, too many cooks in the kitchen can spoil the broth. Or many of you on this Zoom call as managers in finance and accounting and other areas know that, too many people involved in managing a particular activity can ruin it. If we were conducting an orchestra without a conductor, let's say we had a bunch of people meeting at the Dallas Symphony facility, but no conductor, every musician in that orchestra probably has a different idea of how the music should be played. So my personal feeling is it's okay to have a team, your team, to have a say. I don't know what the appropriate amount is, but I would say that everybody who has skin in the game and who has a risk one way or the other regarding the person that gets hired, they should have a say, but maybe not necessarily a vote, because often if there's all these people involved in the process, they all have a vote, they all have different motivations. Some of them, quite frankly, can be political. Some of them may be just the priorities. Some of them may have latent agendas that they don't even know about. And so what happens is you have, let's say the process involves 8 or 9 people, really only one person can say yes, and then the other 7 people can say no. And that's just ridiculous. So you just, it exacerbates or prolongs the problem of finding somebody good. And then the other issue with that is that often the person that gets hired wasn't the best candidate. They just happen to be better at, suffering through the process and putting up with the lengthy marathon of the interview. And they were better at dealing with a bunch of people that may have been disinterested members of the team, but he or she met with them anyway. And then what's worse is we get all these people involved. Most often, they're all asking the same questions or really not garnering any new information. So you meet with 8 people and they're all capturing the same information about you. And that's a mistake. That's something internally hiring managers need to work on so that they have a specific process. Cliff and I and some of you others on this call came out of public accounting. And the process in my day is you met with 8 let's say 6 to 8 people that day, but each one of those people you met with had a different agenda and discussed different parts about your background. I think that's appropriate. And so I'm okay with more people being involved in the interview process, but don't make it ridiculous. And sometimes if you do, there's a cost to be paid. I'm reminded of a client that asked us to help them find a controller for one of their divisions. And they met with, I guess, eight different people, four each on 2 different days. And one of the last people our person met with was the COO, who quite frankly had nothing to do with the accounting process. And the COO happened to ask our candidate, well, you know, when you set priorities, do you use any particular kind of tool, or how do you keep track of things? How do you manage your day? And our candidate said, well, you know, I've used, you know, different Microsoft product tools and planning tools and so forth, but what I really prefer to do is just put it on an Excel spreadsheet. Well, that COO came back and said, oh, we can't hire this guy because they'll spend all their time creating spreadsheets and getting nothing done. Well, that was neither fair nor accurate and had nothing to do with whether or not the controller was good at getting monthly financials out and doing special reports and management reports and managing a team. But to that COO, that was his voice, and that was his vote of no. So hiring managers need to avoid that. And if you're a candidate, the best thing you could do is try to understand beforehand who's going to be involved in the process and do your best to find out what their interest or motivation in the hiring process is. I often, and I'm sure Cliff and other people who are in our business, try to persuade the client from having too many people involved in the process. Typically, I'll say something like, well, listen, that's an interesting approach, but just so we know, what will that person's perspective bring to this conversation? Or how would that person's perspective be relevant to the decision? Some hiring managers are honest and say, look, Rich, I don't know. I just think they have good instincts about people. The problem with that is the message you give to the candidate is, well, so you hire and fire people on feelings, regardless of whether or not they can get the job done. That's no fun. Or, you know, what if you feel bad about me tomorrow? What if this person's instincts change? And then the other thing for the hiring manager is the cost involved. None of us would go by instinct. Let's just say to hire a VP of finance is a base salary of $150,000. Who among us would say, well, I'm going to trust Susie's instinct? And Susie says, put $150,000 down at the roulette table on 7 red. I'm not making that bet. No more than I would want to make a bet on Susie's instinct, as much as I might love Susie, on whether or not we should hire a particular person, especially since this person has nothing to do with Susie's department or her job. So, you know, the good news is today, when you're being set up for various interviews, we have things like LinkedIn and Google and other free sources of information where you can, you know, do some research and say, okay, I see where this person came from, how long they've been at the company. I know their role. Maybe I can surmise some of their motivations or what's interesting to them. And maybe the hiring manager, hopefully you can find a champion who will brief you and get you prepared. Or if you use a firm like Cliff's or Tony's or ours, hopefully they can brief you and prepare you on what that person's going to try to find out about you or cover, or what's important to them. So information is a big blessing and a big help. So as a candidate, I would try to get as much information about whoever you're going to meet beforehand, and don't show up unprepared on that front. And there's no excuse being unprepared now with so much out on the internet, especially LinkedIn. Nancy, we'll do a next slide.
How about we do a poll right now, Rich?
Sounds great.
All right, this is our third poll, folks. The question is, have you changed your hiring practices during the pandemic? Your choices are yes, no, or not currently, but expect changes. So if you take a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share those results. And there are those results. 36% are changing their practices, 40% aren't, and 23% are possibly changing them, I guess.
Well, that's an interesting set of results. And since this next slide is about the process taking too long, let me speak to that a little bit, because and at the end, maybe Cliff or some others can weigh in on this. We are seeing, thanks to the pandemic, that the process shortened just a little bit. And I think the reason for that is during the pandemic, so many of the meetings that would normally happen face-to-face are being done like this on Zoom. And so it's for whatever reason, it's a little bit easier to coordinate a meeting on Zoom than, you know, somebody who is, you know, well, you'd normally meet with John tomorrow, but John's out on a business trip, or John's going to be out of the office, or John's not available to have a face-to-face meeting. Well, John could be in Chicago tomorrow, but he can still do a Zoom meeting here in Dallas. And the other thing is, because of the pandemic, John, I promise you, John's not traveling as much as he used to. So he's more likely to be in the office and have a little bit more available time. And then the other thing I think about Zoom is, I think it's a little bit easier to keep people contained within the time span of the meeting. I don't know why. Maybe, you know, the free version of Zoom caps out at 45 minutes. That may be something to do with it. But I've found that since probably May, most of our interviews have occurred with clients by way of Zoom, and they've done really well. And in my experience, and maybe later on, or whenever it's appropriate, Cliff and others could weigh in, is since the pandemic, the process is being shortened a bit. But as far as the process taking too long, for years, this has been one of mine and probably everybody else who's involved in recruiting or hiring process, it's been their pet peeve. So often, matter of fact, I have one going on right now. A client meets a candidate, tells us he or she is perfect, but I really need to see at least 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 more candidates before I press go on this one. I want this person, but I need to meet they need to meet 5 other team members in our organization. Or, this person's perfect, but I forgot to mention to you that we have to post the position internally and wait 3 weeks. So as good as this candidate is, they're going to have to wait 5 to 6 weeks. Well, sometimes the hiring manager makes the assumption the longer we draw this out, or the longer I date somebody, my marriage will be better. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's better to take a long time to make good decisions. But as far as dating, one of my closest friends dated a woman for 8 years, married her, and divorced 2 years later. So I don't know that there's a correlation on how long you date and how long you stay married, no more than there is a correlation on how long the process takes for you to hire the perfect person. And if you wait for that perfect person to come along, or if you don't move fast enough on the perfect person that has surfaced, if you snooze, you lose. While you wait, that old employer may be making that candidate a counteroffer, or more bidders may arrive, or the candidate sees your latest earnings report that maybe between their first visit and their second visit isn't so good, and they get scared, or they're at a cocktail party and somebody says, "Oh, last thing you ever want to do is go work for those guys." So, prolonging that is it really, time kills deals. And so it can be very hurtful in the hiring process if you wait too long. We had a candidate who had been negotiating and working with one of our clients for about 3 weeks. And the client waited another 4 weeks to say, okay, here's my offer. They made her an offer. Well, in between time, another client of ours looked at her and she called him up and said, well, I'm taking this other offer. That client called me on a Saturday morning and said, Rich, we're going to move tomorrow. We'll throw everything but the kitchen sink. They made her an offer on a Sunday. So speed helped them. So as a candidate, it's in your best interest, and quite frankly, it's in the client's best interest to move faster. And so I would never advise a candidate to create a false sense of urgency, but it is fair game to be honest. And honest might be saying, Mr. Hiring Manager, I appreciate your extensive hiring process. That speaks well of the thought you're putting into this regarding us potentially being a good match. However, I have a family. I have fixed family financial obligations that will require me to take a position on or before such and such date. As much as I'd prefer to work for you and your company, under my current circumstances, I just can't elongate my career decision process beyond whatever you're comfortable with saying, 30, 60, 90 days. Or what we're seeing a lot of, and even in what most of us perceive to be a bad economy, a candidate last week told our client, listen, I promised another company I'd reply to their offer by Monday. And I like your company better, but I can't afford to risk losing that other opportunity because of your elongated hiring process. So I honestly need you to tell me by Monday if I'm going to be hired or not. Otherwise, I have to take this other offer. I owe it to my family. I owe it to myself. This other company candidly might be my second choice, but they're ready to make an offer and you're not. So again, don't create a false sense of urgency. Don't make that stuff up. It'll come back and bite you. But I think it's fair to be honest and candid with hiring managers about the process. And as I said, I think it's a win on both sides if you can expedite it. Nancy, I think we're ready for the next slide.
I think we're going to ask a next poll, Rich, because this poll speaks to your next topic. So poll number 4 is on your screen. It is, how confident are you in your skills interviewing candidates? Very confident, somewhat confident, you need more skills. Please hit.
I see it on the screen. Maybe everybody else does.
Okay, sorry. There is your poll. I do apologize. How confident are you in your skills interviewing candidates? I'll give you just a few more seconds. There you are. Okay. There are your results. Well, look at that.
Looks like everybody feels pretty confident. So I don't have to spend much time on this slide.
I doubt it.
All right. Well, the key thing here is a hiring manager should just be asking a core set of quick questions. Can this person do the job? Will this person fit in with us? Is it a good neutral fit? Meaning, are we the right place for this person, this professional? Is the candidate a risk? So sometimes you worry about, well, they'll leave. They have a track record of leaving jobs prematurely. We get them all trained up and they leave in 6 months. Or they have other issues that maybe will make us look bad. And then I think the final one is, can we work out the money? And so on the one end, interviewing is, not necessarily a practice shot for everybody. Often we find people hiring managers spending all their time telling instead of listening. But most of all, we need to understand, more about what makes a person tick. Make sure that we have some standard interview questions that we ask every candidate so we can measure one against the other, more or less compare apples against apples. Try to stay on point. God forbid you ever ask them to tell me about that famous "tell me about yourself" question, and try to focus on have they fixed this thing before? Do they have a track record and experience in doing this? That's the first round. You can go into more depth the second round when it's more personal and think about culture fit and a lot of other things. But if the person can't do the job, then there's not much else to talk about. The money can always be worked out. People can make their own judgment about whether or not they're in rhythm with your culture and stuff like that. But if they can't do the job and the hiring manager isn't figuring that out in the first round of interviews, and you're not sure of it and talking to them, then there probably is going to be a disconnect. And so for a candidate, get an understanding of what the job requires as much as you can from the hiring manager, and then focus on getting your 3 to 5 most important points across about how you've done a job like that similarly and how much you enjoyed it and things like that. And then, hopefully get at least 3 to 5 of your most important questions answered. So since most of the people on the call are aces at that, we won't spend a lot more time on it. We'll go to the next slide. Are you still there, Nancy?
It's up.
Okay. Oh, interviewing and not interviewing based on a resume. So most hiring authorities use resumes, quite frankly, to exclude candidates. And I think anybody on this call can understand that and understand why. Certainly I do. Because today, especially, hiring managers are flooded with resumes. The internet makes it so easy to apply for just about anything. In the old days, when I started my career, if I applied for a job, I had to, have a resume typed up and printed. I had to put it in an envelope, had to buy a stamp, had to go to the post office. Today, in the time it would take me to do that for just one job application, I can go online and apply for 30 to 50 jobs in the same amount of time. So as a hiring manager, I can tell you that we ran a posting not too long ago for an SEC reporting specialist. With God as my witness, we got applications from people who were prison guards and cashiers at Sonic. They couldn't spell the word accounting, and they certainly didn't even know what SEC meant, but they were in the mix and applying for an SEC reporting job. And so you got to be empathetic with why hiring managers use resumes. And also, I think most everybody would know that every hiring manager has access to an applicant tracking system where they can screen resumes based on keywords. And so as an applicant, what you need to do is make sure that your resume, and it's so easy to do these days, is tuned into those keywords that are on that job description or the requirement summary. And avoid taking up space with fluff, like saying, oh, I'm a team player, I work hard, or I'm really organized. So try to mimic the hiring manager's specific language or definition responding to a requirement. Just 2 days ago, I guess it was Friday, we got a call for somebody, we don't do many of these, but a project, we needed a very high-end collections specialist. So unfortunately, we don't place many of those, but we do have a lot of accounts receivable managers in our database. Well, it turns out, we have one accounts receivable manager. She spent 80% of her time on collections, and her company sold to companies like Walmart and Macy's and other things. Yet the word collections was nowhere on her resume. Now, that's not her fault. She was in our database because, she applied for an accounts receivable job. But, when in doubt, a good hiring manager will say, well, look, let's take 10 or 15 minutes to call this person and see if they happen to have collections experience. So, recognize that the resumes at best are going to cover 35 to 40% of a candidate's skills. And also that certain nomenclature isn't going to carry over all the time. In the banking industry, it used to drive me nuts that savings and loans used to call repossessed properties real estate owned, and banks would call it, or they'd use the acronym REO, and banks would call it owned real estate, ORE. Well, if you were using an applicant tracking system and they're both the same thing. But if you were using an applicant tracking system and typed in REO, you'd miss all the people who did ORE. So don't try to avoid some of that. And but if you're a candidate, try to mimic what the specific language or definition is. The other thing is, I tell people to emphasize track record over experience. So let me first give you an example of what I mean by that. Many of us started our career in public accounting, and let's just say we worked for Price Waterhouse. So there's a pretty regimented promotion venue in most of the big four public accounting firms. So let's say you and I both had 7 years of experience at Price Waterhouse, but you made manager in 4 years and it took me 7. You have a better track record. If you and I both went to University of Texas in Austin and we graduated the same year, but you graduated in the top 10% of your class and I graduated in the bottom 10, you have a much better track record. And so track record is what differentiates us. And you should use that on your resume to differentiate your skills against other people. So in accounting and finance, let's just say I have 10 years of experience as a CFO, and somebody on this Zoom call has 10 years of experience as a CFO. And we both started about the same time with a little $10 million company. But 10 years passed, and your company is now almost 100 million in revenue, and mine is still only 10 or 15 million. Your company grew because you were smart at attracting capital and doing mergers and acquisitions. Mine stayed the same because maybe I wasn't so good at that. So who is the better candidate? You are. You've got a superior track record. We both have exactly the same experience. We started out in almost identical places, but your track record shows so much better than mine. And so track record is what differentiates you. And you should use the resume to highlight that. And it can be simple stuff, reduce SG&A by X%, increase profit margin by 15%, restructured lines of credit and saves 20% in interest costs, implemented controls solving, audit issues. Whatever it is, talk as much as you can about your track record so that you can differentiate yourself from other people who may just have the same number of years of experience, and that'll help you. That'll help you stand out. I'm going to run a little bit out of time, so let's go to slide number 7.
There you go.
Interviewing either too few or too many candidates. We've already talked a little bit about interviewing too many candidates. And the problem there is sooner or later, as a hiring manager, all these candidates will run together, and in your mind, and if you're hiring or interviewing, them over a lengthy period of time, the best ones that you see by the time you get around to hiring them, they're off doing something else. They've already taken a counteroffer, and and decided that, you know, you just took too long. Or they were interested in you, but they decided your location was too far, your benefits were too low. They were good about being hired by you a month ago, but now a month and a half has passed and they found other options that they like better. So all of us like and want a choice. So I think it's fair for a hiring manager to say, well, let's look at least 3 to 5 people for the position. And I think that's smart. Looking at less than that, the problem is 2 or 3 things. One is, if your best candidate declines you or takes something else by the time you make them an offer, you don't have a backup candidate. And then if you don't have a backup candidate, now you're starting the process all over from square one and taking more time. And as a candidate, the good side of that is if you keep yourself in the mix, you have, in my experience, a 1 in 3 chance of still getting the job, because maybe the top pick has, you know, taken something else because the process went too long, or they declined it for other reasons, and so you're still in the game. And that's in a decent job market. Even in a bad job market, I think you have a 1 in 5 chance of still getting the deal. So don't give up until you actually hear that somebody has actually taken the position, and you know, just keep communicating and keep talking, and you know, if it does close, you move on to something else, but stay in the game as much as you can and always be nice. I guess we better go to slide 8, Nancy. Practice good communication and candor. I would say that both hiring managers and candidates really should endeavor to over-communicate. You know, I will openly confess, as a hiring manager, I do something we all do. We promise that we're going to get back to the candidate in 1 to 2 days, and 3 days pass, a week pass, 2 weeks pass, and we didn't get back to them. You know, we get concerned with something else that's going on that's a higher priority. I find that a lot of hiring managers don't get back to candidates because they hate delivering bad news, or sometimes they just got forgot. But the truth is, it's very disrespectful and rude if anybody in my business or any hiring manager doesn't get back. And I think it's a matter of integrity, getting back to people. It's doing what you say you're going to do. Even if you let a lot of time pass and there was no ill intentions, it's just not the right thing to do. And more importantly, which I think Bob and Cliff and other people on this call will acknowledge, that Dallas-Fort Worth is really the biggest small town you'll ever live in. People will remember how you treated them when you interviewed them. And this is also a time and place where roles reverse. Today you're a hiring manager, tomorrow you may be a candidate. So today you made somebody mad because they kept calling to get more information, you ignored them or didn't get back to them. And tomorrow they've landed someplace, you're out of a job and you want to go apply for their company, and they see your name and say, oh, that person was a jerk. I called them, begged to get information just to let them know, and they didn't even give me the consideration of getting back to me. So remember that, because things in Dallas-Fort Worth tend to come back around, and so it's good to be nice and respectful of people. So get back to people. The other thing is, as a candidate, often I hear candidates say, well, I don't want to be overbearing. I don't want the hiring manager to think I'm a stalker or a pest. But I'm here to promise you that checking back in regularly, once or twice a week, is permissible, and it shows your professionalism and interest in the job. Who knows, maybe that job didn't materialize for you, but there's others that come down the road, or the top pick goes a different direction. And in my experience, the person who checks in most often usually advances up on the list, because we know you're interested, we develop more rapport, and so keep checking in. Not every once every.
Rich, that's right. That's right. Just a simple email. You don't really have to connect on the phone, but just a simple email might give you a few points of interest that get you over the hump.
Yeah, and it's so much. To Cliff's point, it's so easy to do that there's almost no excuse. And the worst that can happen is somebody will ignore you, but at least you've done your part. And I think it's just a smart, easy thing for people to do. I guess, Nancy, we better go to slide 9. Not selling the job and the company. So if you're a hiring manager, you have to understand that most candidates want to be able to go home and tell their significant other or be at a family party or reunion and say, oh man, I am so excited about interviewing with the Thomas Edwards Group or XYZ company. And you as a hiring manager, you have to own selling that job and opportunity to the candidate. If you can't excitedly sell the opportunity to a potential new hire, then you better find somebody else to do your job, because that's probably one of the most important things in the hiring process. Candidates, even in bad job markets, want to know that they're going to a good place, that there's some sizzle. And so it's your job as a hiring manager to learn what motivates a good candidate. And you can learn that from the interview process. And then once you learn that, then ways to sell it is, there's an old adage that says, if I say it about myself, it is sold, but if the buyer or third party says it about me, it is gold. So maybe if you're a hiring manager, you can say, oh, our employees love our culture here. They love the benefit program. Our employees tell us how great our training program is and how thoughtful our mentorship program is. They love the fact that we match this, or they love that we take Fridays off, or they love that we do these things after work. Those are things that are exciting and create some sizzle. They love that we're going to grow and double in size next year, all of those things. And then if you're a candidate, don't just think specifically about the money or the title of the opportunity. Think about, well, how will this help my long-term career goals? What will I learn? What about the people I'll become associated with? What will that do for my career? If you're focused just on the money and the title, then you're making you're sacrificing some long-term benefits for some short-term, wins, which in life, those things seldom work out. So, you should be selling yourself, obviously, to the company, but they should be selling you on what a great place it is to work and that sort of thing. And especially, smaller companies, which in today's market, they're doing the majority of the hires. And so if they want to attract you away from somebody who's bigger or well-financed or has already, gone through a really good growth mode, they better be able to give you some stuff that you could go home and tell your mother or your father or your significant other, I can't believe I had this opportunity with this great company. That's their job, and I'm hoping hiring managers will continue to find ways to do that and do it better. Guess we better go to slide number 10, Nancy.
Thank you, Rich. I think we'll throw a poll up right now for our folks to answer. So, because we're getting to the top of the hour. Poll 5, how confident are you in your own interview skills while looking for a new position? We'll give you just a few minutes for that, or a few seconds for that. It's not a hard question. You all are very confident. All right, I'm going to share those results. Again, we have lots of confident people.
Yeah, good. That's great. Well, anybody who's not feeling confident, there's lots of stuff out there. I know Cliff on his website and groups like ours, have lots of free information. Tony at Babbage has something called job search solution that if you're a candidate, you can download, or even if you're not a candidate, if somebody's interested, they can email me, and they change the password every month, but I'll be glad to send you the password with no strings attached. Tony, we're doing it for veterans, for example, who are new to the job market and those sorts of things. So those who don't feel confident in the job search or interview process, there's tons of stuff out there between Cliff and Tony and lots of other people. So the fact that one of the next to last slides is about no backup candidates. And so what that means is, hiring managers find somebody that they're really excited about, and they put all of their eggs in that one basket. And then something bad happens, like they, at the 11th hour, the candidate declines the offer. You'd think they have accepted and that sort of thing, and they haven't. I'm reminded of I sit on a board of a couple foundations, and not too long ago, I was on the search committee to help one foundation find a new CEO. And so I show up at the board meeting a day early thinking, well, we're going to introduce our new CEO. We're going to get all these rounds of applause and thanks for finding such a great human being to run this charitable foundation. Well, the night before, the candidate calls me and says, Rich, I don't know how to tell you this, but this other thing came out of nowhere. It's closer to where I live. I don't have to relocate. I'm taking this other position. So I go into the board meeting the next day, and the chairman's, I have to make this public announcement that we lost the candidate. Chairman of the board says, well, no problem, Rich. Who else do we have in queue? And I wanted to pretend that I had a heart attack so I could leave the room because we stopped interviewing when we identified the top pick, and there was no backup candidate. So my advice is always to keep the process going until the selected candidate actually shows up for the job. And I would also tell you, if you're a candidate that got declined, always stay in the game and have the attitude that the deal is not done until the other candidate is actually showing up in the office and doing the work. I can tell you personally, we were making an internal hire a few years ago, and I actually used a headhunting firm, not Cliff's, but another one, not Tony's either. And we made an offer to a young man, top performer. He signed all of the onboarding documents. He came in on a Wednesday to pick up his laptop and a key to the office, and he was scheduled to start the following Monday. So I said, his name wasn't John, but I'll just say his name is John. I said, well, John, on Fridays, we have a staff meeting. Why don't you come to our Friday staff meeting so I can introduce you to the whole team at once, and you'll get oriented to what's going on. And John agreed. That was on a Wednesday afternoon when he picked up his key and laptop and so forth. So Friday morning staff meeting comes along, and John is a no-show. And just getting a little disquieted about it. And so we have our meeting, and after the meeting, it's just driving me to distraction. Gosh, John must have gotten in an accident. I can't believe, he wasn't able to come to the meeting. So I'm calling John on his cell phone, and no answer. Finally, I get perturbed enough that I look on his application and look at his emergency number. I call that, and I get his girlfriend. Girlfriend doesn't know who I am. I said, hey, listen, I've been trying to reach John, but he doesn't answer. She said, oh, that's probably because John's on a plane right now to New York. And I said, no kidding. What's John doing flying to New York? Well, he's got an interview this afternoon in New York. And I thought, when John landed, I was able to get him. We rescinded our offer. And I called the person that we declined just the Wednesday before. After John picked up the laptop, I thought, well, this is a done deal. So I had to, eat a little crow, but I called the person that we declined. She turned out to be a terrific hire, by the way. but we had declined her in favor of John. So she had already written off the possibility of the job. I told her, you know, offers made, he's onboarded, so on and so forth. So the lesson there is always keep the door open. These things happen, and you'd be amazed at how often they happen.
You know, Rich, I totally agree with that. I think we always want to set our sights on being the number one. But I feel like if you finish in the top 2 or 3, then you're doing the right things, and probabilities are that you're going to get that one or one pretty quickly. We see companies go to the number 2 candidate all the time. We also see the one who's ranked number 2 or number 3 go to the final round and come out as number 1. And then occasionally we'll see somebody take a job, especially if they move, but maybe take a job, things don't work out, and 3 to 6 months later, they decide to leave or they get left. And I think if you have a really good rapport and you finish a close second, it can be any factor. It can be one, just like you said, it can be one hand in the air that stops that person from being number 1. Don't take it personal. Every candidate has a different background at these higher levels. And, you know, you may get a chance, you may finish second, but you may get a chance to prove that you were the best one. And, you know, so it happens more often than you think.
Yeah, and especially to Cliff's point, don't take it personal. There might have been just a sliver of a difference between you and that other pick. And who cares? You know, it's just if you finished, you know, if you finished the race and won the deal, why wouldn't you? And the other thing is even that position, if you missed out on that, most companies, if they're growing, there's going to be other ones, or they're going to know somebody else to refer you to. Cliff and I have talked over the years about, you know, somebody that wasn't in the right time or place for him to hire them, but might have been the right person for us, or vice versa. So again, going back to what a small town Dallas-Fort Worth is, you know, if you make a good showing, don't give up. Just keep up with the hiring manager, because they'll know other people hiring, or they'll say, hey, you know, I didn't know about this, but we're growing now. Now we have a place for you. So stay in the game as much as you can. I guess, Nancy, the final slide. So the final item is not firing a new hire when it's obvious that you made a mistake. What I have to say about this is that early in my career, I had a mentor who told me that he's never known anyone to fire a person too soon. So he said, Rich, once you decide that the person is not right, don't dilly-dally, just go ahead and let them go. Unfortunately, his message never stuck with me. I confess that I still take too long to take care of my hiring mistakes that I've made. And mainly, I mean, it's just how I'm wired. I'd almost rather gnaw off my arm than let somebody go. It's just like all of us. I think all of us on this Zoom call, and most people that we know, you know, we're caring, humane people, and we're prone to avoid firing people as long or as much as we can, because that's just a normal emotion. We hate, you know, the bad feelings and the emotion that comes along with having to tell somebody that they no longer have a job or they're not wanted on your team. If you enjoy doing that, I would tell you that you're probably not a human being. So that said, logically, it really does not serve the best interests of the employee or your company or the team if you prolong the inevitable. And most often than not, it causes more harm than good. If someone's not the right fit, you should be giving people the opportunity to get on with their lives and find a place where they will be in rhythm with their work. And quite frankly, that's more humane than keeping them in a place where they're not going to succeed. It's hard for us to all digest, but I think it's a logical truth. And so we have to kind of suck it up and say, I made a mistake. let's not let it prolong itself, and both the person I hired and me get more and more emotionally vested in one another, or more training, more money. It just makes the process harder. It's, as they say, it's a lot easier to take the bandage off in one quick pull than to pull it off slowly. So I would say that as humans, we tend to take too long to let people go, especially if we've just hired them and early on we find out that we've made a mistake. But my advice is to try to emotionally overcome that and do the right thing, because it'll be important to not just you and your team, but the person you're letting go as well. And that's it, Nancy.
Thank you, Rich. We have one more poll for my audience. This will conclude the polls for today, and then we'll go right into Q&A. The poll is, have we provided you with the information you need? Oh my, well, it's not going to take long for this one. I'll give you just a few more. Oh, there you go. Everybody's happy. I'll give you just a second to share those results. It seems that we have provided lots of information, Rich.
Easy crowd. But we're doing this by Zoom, so they can't throw coffee cups and trash at me, so we're good.
Well, this is Bob Walker. I want to thank you all. Perhaps next month, or not seeing you next month, because quite frankly, I'm going to mimic what Cliff said earlier, which is there's really quite a bit of activity happening out there. So let's keep it up.
Okay. We do have a couple of questions. Cliff, did you want to handle questions?
Yeah, I have one. I was thinking, I get asked a lot, and I know you could probably speak 30 minutes on this, Rich, but we get asked a lot that if there's a position that a person fits in almost every way, but they don't have the specific industry, a lot of times recruiters will stop from submitting them, or maybe they won't. How would you navigate that? If you're a controller or a VP finance or CFO, and you feel like you're a quick learner, you've learned other industries before, but yet everything you're seeing on the job description or from the executive search person says that they really require, energy or healthcare or distribution or whatever it is. How do you navigate that? I mean, we placed a CFO in a healthcare position, and that was the #1 requirement. And we just got very comfortable with the CFO and recommended, out of our 6 candidates or 5 candidates, 1 did not have it, but we were so convinced he would be the right choice. And the CEO took our word for it and interviewed him, hired him, and they exited the company in 2 years and made a lot of money. I'll tell you about the good ones, but not the ones that didn't work out. But what's a good way of doing that? Or is there a way? The audience out there may want to try another industry.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a lot easier if you have, and I'm not trying to, feather Cliff's cap or mine, but if you have a recruiter, usually the hiring manager trusts our judgment. A good recruiter isn't going to oversell. And so sometimes you just have to say, listen, trust me, I'll owe you one. You really need to meet with this person and listen to them. We did actually it was healthcare also, Cliff. We did one with a healthcare company a couple of years ago. And I remember on a Saturday morning having a call with the CFO, almost begging him. I said, listen, we've known each other all these years. You got to trust me that I wouldn't waste your time. So it's easier with a recruiter because there is that bond and trust. And often we're in a business where our clients happen to be friends and our friends happen to be clients. So we get that forbearance sometimes. If you're not doing it that way, then ideally, maybe there's a workaround. Say, hey, look, and we can do this with LinkedIn and some other things, is you know, look up in LinkedIn and find out if you have any relationship with somebody else who knows that hiring manager and get them to press their button. Or again, going back to something I said earlier, maybe focusing a bit more on your track record and say, well, you know, well, I know you're in this particular industry, but based on what I'm reading about your company, let's say, again, let's use telecom again. Well, you're in the telecom industry, but I'm reading about your company and I see that you're out there building a lot of technology facilities. Well, that's really construction accounting. I come from the construction industry. I know what work in process is and all of the nuances of construction. So, or, you know, let me explain to you some of the things I have done, which from an accounting and finance standpoint, which I think most of the people we're talking to are in that bailiwick, are very similar. Going back to the example of the difference between revenue recognition of something that goes through an oil and gas pipeline and something that goes through a satellite dish or a fiber optic. So you do have to be creative, but the good news is, and especially in Dallas-Fort Worth, we're such a relationship-oriented community, sometimes you just press the button and if somebody called me and said, look, I know this person doesn't fit, but trust me, Rich, as a friend to friend, you should be talking with them. I will. And so I think there's probably a simpler solution, but those are part of the ones I see.
Well, I think you see that too, where occasionally maybe a less experienced recruiter may have come across the background and they don't have the pull with the client. You know, if it's Debbie Williams or Jim Ashworth or Rich or, you know, Stephen Constance, they probably have built that rapport where they can get that person. The other thing is if it's somebody in HR that's doing the screening or it goes directly, you know, it can be a lot more difficult. It's almost like if it's directly with the company going through their CPA firm, if it's a small company, or going through maybe an HR person, is that you almost have to look for a networking way to get in at a higher level, you know, get that high level introduction to drop in on the desk.
Looks like there's some Q&As down at the bottom here. I'll just read this one. Recruiting coaches have advised me that you should have numerous recruiters in my camp. Some have said up to 50. I perceive that strategy as a risk, as I could be presented to a company by more than one recruiter. The hiring managers view that as a negative. My concern is that I could be presented differently by different recruiters. So I think you should work with more than one because you know, it diversifies your chances as much as Cliff and I, you know, work the same market space. I can promise you he has a whole arena of opportunities and clients that I'll never hear about or know about. So I do think it's worth, you know, picking, you know, I would say a handful. 50 would be way too much. That would be crazy. You'd spend all your time, you know, trying to keep up with them. But, you know, a handful of people that you connect with, not just because they have the right job for you, but they personally are invested in you and care about who you are and what you're trying to do. I think that would be good. Also, there's certain, you know, find out in your niche, there's certain recruiters that specialize in industries or functional areas that would be more tuned into your background. So I personally don't you know, work that much with oil and gas companies, and I guess nobody does under these circumstances. They're in tough waters, but you know, I would not be the best person for you to talk to if you were looking for an oil and gas job, because maybe we place one person in oil and gas a year, where there's probably 2 or 3 other firms out there that, you know, place 10 to 20 or 30 people in that niche. Same way with banking or real estate or others. So, you know, finding people that specialize in your niche and then talking to, you know, a handful of them, I think would be a smart thing to do.
Yeah, Rich, I would typically, I always say, you know, I have 4 or 5 maybe. There's a handful of recruiters and executive search folks in North Texas that do a lot of high level, and they're good. They've been doing it a long time. Sometimes in some firms, if you get in with somebody that's a little bit of a newer recruiter, they may not have the pull with that big biller. In our company, and I know yours too, Rich, is if somebody comes through the door, whether somebody has been with the firm for a year and met them at a networking event, or if they come through my partner Sharon, either way, they're going to get play for that position, because we're committed to putting the best candidate in front of the client. But sometimes in some of the firms, the compensation and the commission structure might not give you as good a leg up. So I always recommend that if you can do a little research before you go register or go meet with a firm, and try to find out who's been there and who has those relationships. It can open up a lot of different things, and it really just depends on the firm. Now we have another question. What are your thoughts about over hiring? You could have a very experienced person that would be interested in a position, even though they may be a little bit overqualified. Where do you think that has come to? That one gets asked a lot in these networking meetings too, is that, hey, I might be in a position where I wouldn't mind taking a step back, or I know I'll add so much value with my experience that they will be glad they made that hire. So that's another impediment to getting to that final round interview.
So my personal thought on this is that often when a hiring manager says you're overqualified, the first thought that comes to mind is you're too expensive. My budget is for this, and you've been making this plus. And so that's the first thing. They're worried that, well, if I hire you at $20,000 less than what you were making before, or at a title or a level that's lower than what you had before, when the market turns around or something changes, you'll leave my job prematurely to take something that's closer to where you were before I hired you, or wherever you left off. So they see that as a risk. I think my recommendation to clients is that you always want to see a little bit past the tip of your skis. So, if most companies don't intend to stay in neutral, so you always want to hire somebody that has the experience that when you grow to the next stage of your development as a company, this person already has the experience and skill set to handle that they technically have been there, done that, they can scale up, rather than if you hire what you need today and you grow, the person you hired isn't capable of growing with you. So, sometimes as a candidate, I suggest that the candidate tries to help the hiring manager see the vision of where they're going and how you can fit into that growth mode. Yeah, this is a couple steps below what I had before, but truth of the matter is, if I look at where you are now and where you're going, I think you're going to need somebody like me, and I can help build the infrastructure and do the heavy lifting now to help get you there.
Excellent. I think those are the questions that we have, Rich. Nancy, can I go ahead and wrap it up?
Thank you very much, Cliff.
Yeah, and thank you, Rich. We so appreciate your time. Thank you to all of the FANG members who attended, and we will see you next month.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Folks who are participating in the CPE, you will receive a CPE notification email in 7 to 10 business days when those CPEs are ready. This does end the webcast today. We do thank you for your participation and your questions. We hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.